Welcome back to the To Be Your Boy podcast with Elliot Ray and Jodie Breardy. This episode is sponsored by Koru Kids, the UK's leading after-school nanny marketplace. There's a huge conversation happening right now, not just amongst parents, but in governments, school, and the media. Across the world, the question is being asked: should social media be banned for under 16s? Australia has already passed legislation. Spain and Portugal are considering similar moves. And here in the UK, the debate has reached government consultation. For many young people, social media is central to friendship, identity, status, and belonging. But it can also bring extreme and widely damaging downsides, such as increased bullying, poor mental health, and isolation. And as parents, we are left trying to work out how to keep our children safe online while helping them thrive offline. So everyone agrees on the goal. We want to keep our children safe, resilient, and well, but there's deep disagreement about the solution. We'll be having a conversation with Kanishka Narayan, the Online Safety Minister, about what the government is considering and the consultation that is currently live. First, we are joined by two leading voices with very different perspectives for an open and honest conversation about how we move forward as a country and as parents, how we navigate all of this. We have Sonia Livingston from the LSE, who is against the ban, and Dr. Susie Davis from Papaya Talks and Smartphone Free Childhood, who is in favour of a ban. So we are super excited for this conversation. We have Sonia and Susie here who are going to take us through their opinions and their views on whether we should have a social media ban for under 16s in the UK. So let's get into it. I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves so the audience know they are listening to some real experts who have been doing the work and have informed opinions. So, Sonia, who are you? What do you do?
Hi, I'm a professor of social psychology at the London School of Economics. I lead a small research centre called Digital Futures for Children with the Five Rights Foundation. And I've spent years doing research directly with young people, sometimes young people specifically with mental health problems and with their families and at school. And my focus is always on how the digital environment is always changing and always in need of our attention.
Incredible. Thank you so much for joining us, Sonia. Susie, over to you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Susie Davies. I'm an NHS GP, and my story really began 8 years ago when I took a job at Student Health Services at Bristol University, and I saw the really poor mental health of students suffering from insomnia, eating disorders, self-harm. And that year we lost, sadly in 2018, Bristol lost 8 students to suicide. So I became personally and profoundly impacted by the poor mental health of young people and got really curious as to why, and started to see very often this relationship between poor tech habits and young people's mental health. And at exactly the same moment, my daughter, who is in year 6, was asking me for a smartphone. So I gathered a community of parents to delay the first smartphone together, and we set up the charity Papaya, which is Parents Against Phone Addiction in Young Adolescents. So I've been working on that for 8 years with lots and lots of young people, hearing their views and helping young people make an informed choice about their relationship with tech. And I've also written a book for teenagers called The Healthy Selfie to again help them develop that healthy relationship with themselves and their technical devices.
Amazing. So we should listen to you both because you've got a lot of knowledge to give us. So opening statements, if you like. Should social media be banned for under 16s? Yes or no? And why? Sonia, let's hear from you first. What do you think?
So I'm going to argue for no. Social media should not be banned, but that doesn't mean that I think social media is great. And I think my argument is really founded on listening to children and young people over the years and trying to understand how important for them the digital world is, how much for them they feel themselves to be the kind of the pioneers and those who are growing up in a world which is not going away, which they want to understand and which they think many adults don't grasp very well. Clearly, what research shows, and I could cite lots of it, is that there are lots of harms linked to social media and there are lots of benefits. So my argument is not everything is fine in the world of social media, and actually many things are getting worse in the world of social media. Still, young people, when we see the polls, are generally saying it's an important place for them where they get their where they see their friends, first and foremost, where they kind of keep up with the world and what's happening in it, and where they relax, have fun, gain help, find people who kind of get them, who understand them. And we have, I think what's really important to understand is over the years that we've all pivoted, many people have pivoted to social media, we have kind of redefined our society outside the world of social media. And I think that's especially to do with the pandemic. So we do not, as a society, provide a lot of flexibility and opportunities for children and young people to meet their friends outside school in the evenings on a wet February afternoon when we don't want to let them go out. We have cut back on youth spaces. We don't welcome young people at bus stops and in shopping malls. We have pushed them to social media. And at the same time, we have in this country done something super important, which is to bring in a number of pieces of regulation which are not sufficient, not completely implemented, but have taken an enormous amount of effort and debate. And my priority is that we really make the regulation stick. We really make sure that we have the evidence base to know what is working and what is not working, and that we recognize and provide the support for very vulnerable young people that they need, which is not going to come just by turning them away from their friends and cutting them off information. It's going to come by properly funding our mental health services. It's going to come by having a clear understanding of where some young people are at risk and advising parents, but most of all, of regulating the big tech companies that are pushing the problems, also providing many of the benefits that young people really want. So I could say more about kind of findings and research, but maybe that gives you a sense that I'm not all for it for social media. I'm super worried about some of the things that are happening, but I don't see that just turning it off is going to provide young people with the world they need that gives them the connections that that are vital for them to thrive.
Thanks, Sonia. And we're going to get into a lot of the points that you've made there. I especially resonate with the kind of children not being in the real world, and we've pushed them online. I definitely resonate with that in my own life and with my own family. So thank you so much. Susie, question. Should social media be banned for under 16s? Yes or no? And why? What do you think?
So yes, I am going to argue for raising the age of digital consent to 16. And the reason for that is thinking about the context in which social media is actually set at 13. It wasn't experts who set this age. It hadn't been well thought through. It was actually from a 1998 data privacy law set in America as the minimum age that tech companies can sell and harvest our young people's data without parental consent. Now, fast forward 30 years and the internet is a completely different place to it was when this law was set. There wasn't even social media 30 years ago. There were no addictive algorithms. And certainly the terms cyberbullying, sextortion, and grooming hadn't even been coined. And let's think about the internet now that our children are inhabiting. And this is where the problem lies. It is addictive by design. Tech companies have invested billions of dollars making social media as addictive as possible. And I think we can all see that ourselves. You know, we can start scrolling on our phones and you can lose 20, 30 minutes without even thinking or noticing. But our young people are losing on average 2 to 4 hours every day to social media alone. And a minority of them are losing 5 hours or more. But it's not just the time that they're losing. And often young people tell me they're actually horrified when they realize they've lost the hours they should have been revising to their phones. It's not just the time, it's the content that they're viewing. We know that online comparison is making young people less happy with their own lives, and it's causing them to feel less satisfied, lower their mood, and suffer from more anxiety. There's also the impact on their sleep. Preteens are losing, on average, 1 night's sleep per week to social media. I would feel awful if I was losing that much sleep every week. They're exposed to pornography, with the average 12-year-old being exposed to pornography for the first time whilst viewing their homework. And the idea for me that this exposure is worth the risk for freedom online for both adults and children is something that as a parent and a health professional, I actually can't comprehend. And then also there's the predatory risk, which is becoming much, much greater with grooming and sextortion having an 8-fold increase in just 1 year from 22 to 23, and it's getting worse all the time. I also want to just mention the context of being a 13-year-old. Self-esteem, we know, is lowest in early adolescence. So just at the moment, young people are more self-aware, struggling with their own self-identity. They're being exposed to this content. Their prefrontal cortex, the bit of their brain responsible for decision-making and impulse control, is not yet fully developed. So the real question is the current age of 13 adequate when we think about the exposure our young people have to harm and their developmental ability? And I think the answer clearly is no, that our young people, we just need to give them more time to develop, more time to be, more time to enjoy the real world. And delaying social media to 16 would give them that.
Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Koru Kids.
When my kids were younger, I never considered getting a nanny. It just seemed like something posh people do, something completely out of reach, certainly for me. But times have really changed, and with nurseries, childminders and wraparound care, costs can really mount. And just imagine the peace of mind of having one person who your kids love, who you can rely on implicitly to look after your child in your home, someone who can handle school pickups, help with homework, sort dinner, and help the kids wind down. So you can finish your work guilt-free and come home to peace and serenity and be totally present with your kids. If I was to have another baby, which, I definitely won't be because I bought a dog instead, I would be considering nannies as an option. The flexibility, the simplicity, having one person you can fully trust.
I hear you. Shout out to the dog parents, me included. I need that in my life now. Koru Kids has full and part-time nannies that can work when your family actually needs them. Their nannies are vetted and trained, and they work all across the UK, so they will be where you are at. So why not have a look at their website, korukids.co.uk. It is free to search, and you can see what the cost difference is and whether it's a good fit for you. korukids.co.uk, that's KORU kids.co.uk. I could feel my body tensing up when you were talking about the amount of time lost to social media every day. When you put it like that, it's really compelling. Let's talk about mental health. So mental health evidence. Sonia, I've got a question for you. So we've had years of data linking heavy social media use to anxiety, depression, and self-harm. I know from speaking to many parents, given this information we have about mental health, they feel like banning it is a no-brainer because it's harmful. And if something is that harmful, it feels right to just take it away. So given that evidence around social media, what are your thoughts on whether a ban would work in regards to kind of addressing those issues?
I think we should come to the question of whether a ban would work as a kind of separate thing. I think the point I'd like to question in what you just said is how much the time spent on social media is the cause of the mental health problems that young people are facing. So we've had lots of studies, and I don't want to kind of argue about, we can argue about the kind of ins and outs of the different studies, but my summary would be that the kind of causal direction goes both ways. So there's evidence that if young people use more social media, overall, their mental health is a little worse, but there are kind of ups and, there are benefits as well. It's a kind of a small finding. But also that the young people with mental health difficulties tend to turn to social media. Maybe they don't have friends, maybe they can't talk to parents, maybe they've got problems that they want to research. And the algorithms, which can be pernicious and which I absolutely think should be regulated, then can push them down a problematic rabbit hole. So all of that is to say that the role of social media in young people's mental health difficulties is, I would say, kind of moderate. And there are other causes of mental health problems that our young people are facing, of which the number one, according to the Good Childhood Report, actually is academic pressure. And I'm amazed that we don't have podcasts on how to reduce the academic pressures on our children in a world in which their future is really uncertain, their their confidence that they're going to earn enough money. There are a lot of pressures on young people. The pandemic made everything worse. It introduced a lot of family conflict, family difficulties, and worries about the cost of living and so on. So I'm just really concerned that we somehow center on social media as like the presenting problem, the thing in front of us, a child's looking at a screen, and think that by banning it, we're going to solve all of those problems in children's lives, because we're not. And I would love us to broaden the conversation and say, if we're worried about our young people's mental health, which we should be, let us think about the different things that we can be doing. Funding mental health support services, as I'm sure Susie would agree, has really crashed and is really a priority, because we have young people waiting on the waiting list so long. So yes, social media is part of the mix. Is it the answer to everything, and is banning it the answer to everything? Absolutely not. And that's why I want a broader conversation that kind of really centers young people and their needs in a what's become a bit of a kind of polarized, too polarized debate. There will be no simple solutions.
Susie, what do you think? Is social media the cause of this poor mental health, or is it a chicken and egg situation? What comes first?
Well, I would say as a GP, what I am seeing every single day is young people in mental health crisis. And I can often directly attribute it to their social media use. So just yesterday, saw a 16-year-old who had had hate crime online. She'd actually had to move out of her family home. She was on the cusp of homelessness. She was severely, severely depressed. Now, obviously, society is complex, and I agree with Sonia, there are many problems. But our young people's access to social media is something we can fix and we can change. And this is why, as parents and healthcare professionals, we feel so passionately about it, because every single day, we are trying to fix people who are broken. And I would rather see money invested in preventative services than spending all our resources on cams trying to fix young people who are broken. So of course it's complex. Of course society is a hard place for young people to thrive. But the thing that has changed, or one of the main things that has changed in the last decade, is that our young people are losing 2 to 4 hours every single day. They're spending that time comparing themselves to others online. They're being exposed to horrific content. I see young people with PTSD, with trauma from the content that they've seen online. As I've mentioned, they're losing sleep, and sleep is the foundation of good mental health. And I've met young people who've managed to cut back their social media time, who've managed to replace it with positive activities. It is about replacement. And they have been so much better. I can see them beaming at me as they come into their GP surgery saying, doctor, I did it. I deleted TikTok. I've been to the park with my friends and I feel so much better. Now, that's a really oversimplistic view, but day in, day out, I am seeing the problem. And I think it does work both ways. It is cause and effect, but actually both are equally worrying, aren't they? If it's causing the mental health problems or if it's exacerbating pre-existing mental health problems, both are damaging our young people. And our young people need every little bit of help that they can get to thrive in today's age. And I think we are not helping them by giving them unlimited access to these harmful products.
Can I come back? So I think I absolutely hear you, Susie, about the pain that walks in through your consulting room. And I think there are many young people who are struggling with all kinds of things, including their social media use. I do not spend all my time with young people, but quite frequently I go into schools, I go into homes, I talk to young people. And I don't just talk to those who are in extremis. I talk to those who don't need to go to the doctor, who are fine, who are getting on with their schoolwork, who are happy in their daily life. And so I hear a wide range. And that's, I think, what the research hears from when also in surveys, we survey a representative sample of the population. Somehow we need a way of thinking about those who are in extremis and the many young people that I talk to who say they've been through a bit of a sticky patch and they've figured it out for themselves and now they're okay, or they have their particular interests and they kind of know how to play the algorithm and find their friends and talk to their friends about whatever it is and not lose hours or lose enormous amounts of sleep. So I talk to young people who, in the main, and this is what research tells us, the majority, so hard to weigh the majority against the vulnerable minority. But I hear from very many young people who feel that it's a difficult world in many ways, and it's a world full of opportunities in many ways, And by the age of 16, they are finding their way. So I would not have very young children on social media. I actually think if we could enforce that age of 13, that would be good. We haven't managed to, but if we did, that would be good. But in those adolescent years, that's when young people are the agents who feel that they are finding their way in their digital world. And very many of them are managing it. And they don't want to have that kind of denied them. They feel that this is a resilience that they have gained, and they don't call it losing 2 to 4 hours a day. They admit that they lose half an hour or a bit of time to the algorithms, but they also think they're up to date with the news. They are in touch with their friends. They've got the latest funny meme. They know what a good joke is to share the next day in school, and maybe they've watched some YouTube videos about how to solve the maths problem that they're struggling with. That's the mix that they tell me about.
Can I say, I just think that's an idealistic view of what young people are experiencing online. We could debate about this, but I also think this is not a minority of people who are struggling with their mental health. I don't think there's an adult listening to this podcast who doesn't know a young person in mental health crisis, whether it's your own child, a niece or nephew, or a child you teach at school. And that is something a decade ago I couldn't have imagined saying. Something is not working for our children, and I truly believe it's correlated to what they're exposed to on the internet. But we could discuss that one all day. We'll move on.
Just separately to mental health, that my kids are 10 and 12 and they do sometimes go on YouTube. And more recently, they've been saying things like, I don't want to go to school because education is pointless. It doesn't teach me anything that is going to be useful to me when I leave school. And they've clearly got that messaging from videos they've watched on social media or from friends at school that have watched something on social media. That's one of the reasons why I think banning social media until the age of 16 could be beneficial. Is not necessarily that I think it's going to be bad for their mental health. It's some of these messages that they're being drip fed that I think could be really damaging to them long term. What would your thoughts on that be, Sonia?
Social media, YouTube, it's got everything on it. And young people are finding all kinds of different content. All I can say is when we have the representative surveys that ask every child has a fair chance of being included in, rather than just those who kind of put up their hand and say, I've got a problem, then we get an enormous range of experience. And it is not idealistic. There are many young people who say they are turning to YouTube to help them with their homework, or to see the news, or to know what is happening in their neighborhood, or just to have something funny to relax with, because, that is what they value. There are many young people who are using the different platforms in such a diversity of ways that I think it does a disservice to young people to put them all in the one box, to say they're having a common experience. There are gamers, there are coders, there are fans of particular kinds of music. There are those who are trying to kind of create something. There are those who just want to chill out for an hour or two instead of watching telly with mum and dad, which was never actually always wonderful. Children live very diverse lives. I just don't see how we can put them in one box and say the experience is common for everyone and therefore the solution is the same.
Thank you. This is really good. Let's move on to the darker internet risk. So, Susie, a lot of people who are kind of against the ban, they say that if we ban social media, so a lot of the mainstream apps, like TikTok, etc., if we ban those, then we'll just push young people onto more unregulated parts of the internet where potentially the content is worse, that we don't even know about, and that actually banning social media in that way could just make it worse, because young people will still have phones and they'll still have access to platforms and communication with strangers and all that stuff. So what do you think about that darker internet risk that could potentially come with a social media ban?
Thank you. It's a really good question. And I think what we need to look about is how that ban actually functions, how it works. So I would want to see a ban based on the features, function, and usage of social media rather than specific sites. So actually you look at what are the features that are unsafe for under 16s, like the infinite scroll, persuasive design, geolocation. And actually you have a dynamic ban where sites can move in and out because of the features they've got. So this would mean all of those lesser known sites would be included in the ban if they have their worrying features. It would also include worrying platforms like Roblox and Discord. It would also force social media that if they wanted to have access to under 16-year-olds, they would have to completely redesign the features, the persuasive design features of their social media apps to make them safer. So secondly, if we watch Australia, we have an experiment in progress. There's currently no evidence that children are moving underground, although there is evidence both here and in Australia, more children downloading VPNs, which are virtual private networks. So I think for a ban to work, we have to look at also banning VPNs in the under 18s to coincide with the ban. And also I think parental support for this is absolutely key. A recent YouGov poll said 74% of parents were in support of a ban. So if you've got 3/4 of parents working with the government to try and get their children off social media, it's going to change the societal norm and it's going to make it much easier. The ban empowers parents. It's actually a huge gift to parents because it takes away that I've got to give it to my child because everyone else has got it. So it is complex. I agree. A ban on its own is not enough. We need to work with parents. We need to work with the students, with the children, and we need to look at access to VPNs at the same time to avoid that problem.
Any thoughts on that, Sonia, in regards to the darker internet risk? Is that something that you've been considering?
I think we absolutely want to see the published results of the Australia experiment in progress. My understanding of the early results emerging is that there was a initial surge in use of VPNs and that's tailed off, and that there is absolutely a surge to using turning to Roblox and to Discord and to a number of other platforms that weren't included in the ban list. So looking at that from young people's point of view, they're looking for somewhere to go, and perhaps like water, they will find it. I don't actually think they'll go in enormous numbers on the dark web. I think they are more sensible and that they too are cautious and self-protective, but I do think they will find places to connect with their friends, to have fun, and that's our societal dilemma. How are we going to provide those places for young people when we are so scared to let them go out? A survey of 70,000 British children in the last month said 86% do not want a ban. We can say children don't know what's good for them, or we can think, what is it that 86% of children, this is age from 7 to 16, what are they telling us about social media? I think many of them are figuring out their way. Do they want regulation? Absolutely, yes. Do they want the addictive and persuasive design features dealt with? Absolutely, yes. Do they want the worst excesses of the content taken out? Yes. Do they want a good place to go when something goes wrong? Yes. They're not daft, but they don't want to be excluded. They want the platforms to be regulated, not them to be restricted themselves.
So part of me in thinking about this thinks about social media, but thinks wider than just social media and thinks more about kind of smartphones overall and just the fact that we are losing kids to the screen and the scroll, whatever the app is. And part of me is thinking, is social media the problem? Are we too focused on social media here? Is just our relationships, but our children's relationships with our phones actually more of the issue? And Sonia, you touched on it earlier around, if we take social media away, how are we going to support those children doing things in the real world? So Susie, question to you. Do you think a social media ban actually solves the issues around mental health, isolation, self-harm, etc.? Or is it a wider problem around addiction to screen time, addiction to phones, and the way we have socialized young people out of society? And how do we encourage other things, more sport, more community, more real world connection? What are your thoughts on the core of the problem here? Is it social media or is it just kind of phones and smartphones?
I would agree with all of those points. Yes, it really is about the phone because it's not a phone, is it? It's a mini computer in our pocket. With most of us 24/7. The phone is obviously the mechanism with which young people can download these harmful and addictive apps that we talk about. So I don't just worry about social media, but as you said, we live in a world where it's so easy to disconnect. You can do your shopping online. You can even contact your doctor online. You can book an Uber. Life is just too convenient. And I think children, they desperately need friction to grow. They need challenge to develop, and they need failure to grow resilience. But you can't learn that from the 2 dimensions of a screen in your bedroom. my daughter keeps getting at the bus stop without any money. She keeps having to, negotiate with the bus driver to let her on the bus. That is about learning resilience. Or I ended up in Munich last week. My phone wasn't working and I had to practice a little bit of German, speak to some people to find my way to a hotel. These are really great life skills that you do not learn if you have an app. My head could have been down on Google Maps. I wouldn't have met some lovely people who had guided me around their city. And, we've seen that 13 to 17-year-olds, according to the World Health Organization, are the loneliest in society. They are really, really struggling. As humans, we need to connect, we need to belong, and we need to find purpose in people and as humans. And the greatest irony I find is that actually big tech, social media is now offering the solution to loneliness in the form of chatbots and AI companions. And, we get so much from the daily interactions of life. So the question is the phone the problem? Yes, but 95% of it is about the social media. And if we have a ban, I would go further. Let's take off the web browser. Let's make sure our children don't have VPNs. And then let's focus on restoring childhood. Because children are 20% of our population, but they're 100% of our future. And they deserve, the best childhood they can have. They deserve parks, youth clubs, time outside. They deserve parents, actually, who are happy to let them go out and let them take some risks. Because that is what childhood is about. That is what our children need, but they're not going to find it whilst they're still glued to their devices.
Yeah, it takes me back to many years as a young person being on a train with no money and just having to find my way through the barriers, But yeah, many, many years doing that and having to hustle. And I agree, you learn so much just being out in the real world and having to negotiate and make your way. So Sonia, I know you kind of agree on this. This is a point that we agree on. I think that we need to create more spaces for young people outside.
I think we agree on children needing greater freedoms, children needing greater resources being provided for them. Children live incredibly local lives. A bus journey is probably as far as they go by themselves. They need a park nearby, they need resources nearby, they need youth clubs nearby and so on. I'm still not going to agree on the idea that it's the phone or the social media. So I think it's the business model of big tech. And I think 2 points then that I want to bring into this conversation. Firstly, if we just remove children from the digital world, then big tech will be free to go its merry way. Children are at the moment the kind of very visible reason why big tech is being brought to heel, being brought to attention. Fights that we're seeing from our regulators and from our governments in many countries around the world, with the support of parents and the public, are the nearest we're coming to reining them in and regulating that business model that is so predatory and so much putting profit before the best interests of children. If we take smartphones out of their hands and we take the children off the platforms, they will just carry on doing what they're doing, which is a problem actually for everybody, including children, because this is still tech in the hands of parents. This is still tech in the hands of the predators and those who will still know where children are. We can't remove children from this world. And also we will just wipe out all the benefits that we do genuinely think are part of a digital world. An information resource for everybody, enhanced educational learning opportunities, ways for children with disabilities to overcome and, access some of the constraints that society imposes around them. Where is our media and our kind of entertainment and leisure world? So we can take children away. We will leave the digital world in a really problematic direction. And I think we're focusing on the problem today, which is the smartphone and the social media. But tomorrow, it's not going to be about screens. It's going to be about sensing environments. It's going to be about AI-informed objects in our homes and already in our schools. We're dealing with almost yesterday's problem. And all of that AI and AI-enabled technologies that we're building in children's environments are the same companies and the same predatory business model. And that is why we have to keep saying we need that to change and serve the interests of society, including children, not just try to kind of put children in some cotton wool space outside the world, because the world, it will still reach them. And the world right now is very much being redefined by big tech.
Can I just add in that I think the only way we're going to change big tech is by really hitting their pockets. And this feature-based ban is the only thing that I think is strong enough to force them to change their design models. Ofcom and their fines and regulation hasn't got enough power. It's like pennies to big tech, the fines that they're being given. And so I think unless we force them to change their model, they've had a decade of harm, of court battles, of all sorts of negative publicity, and they are making minimal concessions. For example, a teen Instagram account, a stranger can no longer contact a child. That is the sort of concessions that Meta are prepared to make. And I don't think that is going to change because of the money involved. This isn't about wrapping up our kids in cotton wool. It's actually the opposite. It's about taking the cotton wool off and getting them back out into the real world. And it's the screens that are stopping them do it. I had a young boy in a workshop I ran just last week, and actually he was gaming. He had lost all interest in the outside world. And at the end of my session with him, he just said, "Please help me. I need help. I want to stop gaming, but I can't." Now, if I'd asked him at the beginning of the session, he would have said, "Gaming and social media are my life. I don't have anything else that I do. I don't want anything else. And I completely am against a ban." But just by spending time with him and questioning his beliefs and how he spent his time, just getting him to think about his use of tech meant that he did a full 360 in just a 1 hour group session. And we were able to help him. That is not the life he wanted to lead. I don't believe he was making autonomous choices with his time. He was addicted to gaming, and the gaming was controlling him, not him controlling the gaming. And these platforms are so unsafe for young people that without really huge safeguards in place, a generation of children are being lost.
As a mother of boys, I can attest to that being a problem. Most mothers of boys that I speak to say they have a real issue with their kids being addicted to gaming. And I'm sure some parents of girls also have the same problem. It seems to be very prevalent amongst boys, but this ban wouldn't affect that, would it? Like, that's a separate issue, which is a big issue.
It can include some of the gaming apps like Roblox or multiplayer games. Discord is particularly difficult with the private chat rooms they go into. So I think the ban could certainly clean up gaming. We don't want to take our children off. My son has got an Xbox. We don't want to take our children off gaming completely. What we want is a safer model where they're not exposed to strangers and it's much less addictive by design. So just a much cleaner version of what we've got now. It's not about taking it all away. It's about giving them back. It's about giving them back their free choice. It's about giving our young people their voice and their autonomy back with their time and how they spend it.
I'd quite like to go back to Snake and Tetris.
It was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, Nokia and a Game Boy. I'd love that. That was a great time. We didn't know what we had.
Yeah.
It was the golden era. Susie, you made a great case around the harms, and many of us are aware of the harms. And I think what you see in your practice, some of the young people in very extreme circumstances. I think, Sonia, you've also made the case around some of the opportunity that social media can offer. And we've heard from parents of children with special educational needs, or children who have started businesses online, young people who have found their community, activism, sense of belonging through social media. So what would you say to that? Is there a trade-off here? If we do cut off social media for under 16s, are we also taking away some of the good bits? And is that a price that are we willing to pay that price? Is it worth it?
I'd like to keep as much of the good as possible and take away the harm. But particularly our boys are struggling the most with the online world. We've got 1 in 7 adolescent men not in education and not in work, because our young men in particular, I think, are missing out on their teen years, the importance of risk taking. We've replaced the boys, jumping into lakes and skateboarding and staying out late. It's a bit hair raising as a parent, but adolescent years for boys is about taking risks and learning how to take them safely. But now our young men, our boys, our teenage boys are experiencing sofa culture, living in this 2D world. They don't get to experiment with the risks when risks don't matter, because actually online risk is often more serious than the offline risk because it's permanent. It leaves a permanent digital footprint. It's resulting in many boys being excluded from school and often unintentional or intentional criminality. Our boys aren't learning the social skills, the resilience, the conflict resolution that they learn in the real world. They're missing out on the excitement and the endorphins and the physicality of life. And instead, they're developing this dopamine deficiency state where they're so used to the high dopamine from gaming and social media that it's actually less easy for them to enjoy the real world. And again, I've had particularly young boys in workshops say, why can't I enjoy playing football anymore? Why do I only enjoy gaming or watching YouTube? It's because they are so tolerant to this dopamine high. And their world instead is just saturated with really horrific online content, which can be incredibly misogynistic, which again, as parents, is a great, great concern. And the cultural shift against women that we're seeing. They're also exposed to a huge amounts of pornography, and we're seeing a rise in gender-based violence. Now, something I see as a GP is, which you may not have heard of, but it's a really interesting concept, is the failure to adulthood. And I often see young men brought in by their mothers. They're living at home. They're not working. They're not in employment. They've got low mood, loss of motivation, poor concentration. And their mums come in saying, you've got to help me. My son won't do anything. He's depressed. But actually, he's depressed because he's in his room all the time, often spending time on pornography or gaming and not enjoying the real world, and lost the opportunities to grow up and take risks that young men need in adolescence. So to go back to the question, are we cutting off our young people, particularly maybe our young men, from something valuable online? Well, I think if we ban social media, we're actually cutting off the very thing that's facilitating the problem, the poor mental health and the vulnerabilities. So again, we need to re-engage our young people with society. They actually need a rehabilitation, I think, in living in the real world and how to enjoy outdoor spaces and real social life. But no, I don't think they will suffer. I think instead we're going to give them back the opportunities that they desperately need and that they're really, really missing out on.
Sonia, what's your response? Do you think a ban, this regulation, would cut off some of the good bits of social media and the activism, the opportunity, the belonging that some young people find in social media?
So just on the research, I absolutely acknowledge that there is evidence of young men and boys struggling, though by and large the research shows that the mental health problem is greater among girls and young women, and that relates to the digital world as well as more general statistics. Let's keep the attention on both the girls and the boys. So I might ask the question a different way round. I might ask, what is it in society that we expect we're really talking about 13 to 15-year-olds or maybe up to 15-year-olds. What kind of is our vision for them? What do we think will help them to thrive? And I don't think at any point in history we've said we want to keep that age group from the world as it is unfolding and developing. What we want is that's the kind of time for, if you like, for kind of guided autonomy, which young people they become diverse, they're very different, they find ways to express themselves, they follow very different paths. Whenever I go into a class and ask one question, I get 25 answers. I get as many answers as there are young people. There are, as we know, in any year group, when you go into a school, I don't know, of year 8, there are those who are kind of already a bit grown up, and there are those who are still kind of playing with their Lego, and there's every kind. So that's the age in which it's the stretching, the finding their path, and the kind of following their interest that we want for them. Yes, they could do that a lot more offline than currently they are supported. I think we have agreed on that. But also some of them want to be following the news. Some of them want to be digital creators. Some of them want to be following a kind of particular hobby. Some of them just in a time when the rest of their life is challenging and they need to be gaming. They need to chill out. They need to relax. They need downtime from the pressures of school. We're seeing a lot of different things in that moment of being on the screens. And I just cannot see that all of it is bad. And they will often make a defense. I don't know, mum and dad are always on at me about my grades. I just need to chill out with my friends. I'm really worried about what's happening with everyone at school. I just need a bit of quiet time. They talk about me time. They talk about time for themselves, and it's not all the algorithm, it's not all out of their control. So we're going to take the tech out of their hands while it's still in all of our hands. And we're going to what? Are we going to bring back the magazines that I read when I was a child?
Yeah,
Are we
great.
are we going to, I don't know, are we going to put children's TV back on the telly?
Yes.
Maybe we are, but actually I don't hear that debate. And there is there are challenges in the media world as well. So I think anything that argues for going backwards, and I am, a little wary of kind of middle class visions of the green space outside the house and children playing happily. We need to think of the real world that children are in and the real options. And I would start there. What is it we want for our young adolescents? How do we provide that? And can digital be part of that mix rather than can we keep them away from the modern world entirely?
This has been so interesting. And I think a lot of food for thought for people. Ban or not, it feels like we need a reconfiguration of how we're seeing the world, of opportunities, of real world access, of allowing young people to get on the bus, to make their way to and from school from a younger age, to go into shops by themselves, have conversations with adults, to access media that's not online. And I think that's a question for government, but a question for us as parents as well. So to close, I want you to kind of take away from your sides around the social media ban. And imagine you may have 12-year-old boys. I don't know if you do. Imagine you got a 12-year-old boy. What would you do in your family right now if you had a 12-year-old boy in regards to their relationship with their phone and social media, in terms of them accessing social media, using it, the conversations you're having, their phone? What would you do right now? Susie, over to you first.
So I actually do have a 13-year-old son.
Amazing.
So this is completely relevant for me. And I'm very happy to share my story. So my 13-year-old son has a basic phone. He has no social media. Now, he would love Snapchat, and we have this conversation regularly at home. But the problem is, I know the dangers of Snapchat. I know the algorithm. I know the exposure to inappropriate content. And my son actually also knows the problems of Snapchat because one of his very close friends from school got suspended last week because his Snap account was hacked and AI-generated porn was sent from his account. And it's very hard to prove that wasn't him, but his account was hacked. So my son knows how horrendous Snapchat is and the real-world consequences of having Snap, but he still wants it. So the question is, why is my son so desperate to have Snapchat? And actually, when I ask him, he doesn't want Snapchat because he wants Snapchat. He only wants it because his friends have got Snapchat. It's as simple as that. He doesn't want it at all, but his friends have it. He feels left out. We're living, we're a herd mentality as a society. We want what other people have. So this brings full circle back to why raising the age of digital consent to 16 would be such a positive thing, because actually my son wouldn't be the only one without Snapchat. All his friends would be in the same boat. They would be together. They would be able to re-engage more. He wouldn't be fighting for their time and their attention. And actually none of his friends would be having these horrendous situations where they're suspended from school, experiencing cyberbullying and a real impact on their mental health. So actually, I really want to give my son back his friends. I want to give them back their in real life experiences, which they do enjoy, but I want them to have the fullness of that. But whilst I'm waiting for that delay in social media, I'm holding firm because I know it's harder now, but the benefits of the better mental health, better concentration and better relationships are reaped further and later on. And I've done the same with my almost 18-year-old daughter. She didn't have social media till much later, and she is actually a shining example of a well-rounded young person who would now advocate the advantages of not having had social media on her phone from a young age. And she's really grateful, however difficult it was at the time.
Amazing.
So that's my story.
Incredible. Thank you, Susie. Sonia, what would you do if you had a 12-year-old boy in your house right now?
Well, my 12-year-old boy grew up, but when he was 12, he was a gamer. So he wasn't on social media. He wasn't interested in social media anyway. Gaming was absolutely always a struggle because that was his thing. He did grow up and become a valuable member of society, despite having been, we had some fights when he was 12. Absolutely. What did we do? I think we did what is the only thing parents can do, which is we played the games with him. We talked to him. We made sure that we were the person that he would come to when there was trouble. We did our best, as I think all parents do within their capacity, to provide as rich and full a life as we possibly could. But we acknowledge that children at different points go through different struggles. There was always been bullying before cyberbullying. Some children have always been a loner before we have some children alone with their phone. Childhood has never been easy. And parenthood has never been easy. And I just come back to the fact that 12-year-old boys are all different when I go into the classroom and I talk to them, just as, and the same for girls. So I think parents are doing their best. I don't think the big tech is helping. I don't think the government and the regulators are working hard enough, but we haven't really got into the ins and outs of whether a ban would work. And I'm afraid I have no evidence to show that a ban would work, that if we banned anything, mental health would improve, bullying would go down, you name it. I still think the societal problems are there to be addressed, and that should be where our priorities are.
Round of applause for Sonia and Susie, please. You've both been brilliant. I think we need to do a part 2 in like a year's time. Just see where we're at with this. But, this is a very emotional conversation. So thank you so much for bringing honesty, data, stories to the conversation. Ultimately, we want the same thing. We want to protect our young people. We have slightly different views on how we get there. But, I appreciate and respect you both. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was spicy. That was so interesting. So much to think about. We want to hear your thoughts. What do you think? Are you for or against? What side are you on? Please contact us, tobeaboyteam@gmail.com. We're going to be talking loads more about this topic. So get in touch, let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you soon.